In the early days of World War I, a young soldier named Thomas Miller found himself in the heart of one of the most brutal conflicts the world had ever known. The year was 1916, and the battlefields of Europe were a wasteland of mud, barbed wire, and shattered lives. Trenches stretched for miles, where soldiers lived in constant fear of artillery fire, gas attacks, and the enemy just across the way. Thomas, a farm boy from a quiet village in England, had joined the war with dreams of heroism. But after months in the trenches, he realized that war was not about glory or adventure. It was about survival. The days were long and grueling, the nights filled with the sounds of explosions and distant cries. Yet, through it all, Thomas remained determined to do his duty. One cold, rainy morning, Thomas received a dangerous assignment. His commanding officer handed him a sealed message that needed to be delivered to the front lines, where the battle was fiercest. The message contained vital information about troop movements, and delivering it could change the course of the battle. But the journey was perilous. The path to the front was riddled with enemy fire, and no one knew if Thomas would make it through alive. With no time to hesitate, Thomas set out on his mission. He crawled through the muddy trenches, keeping low to avoid being spotted by enemy snipers. The sound of artillery shells exploding around him was deafening, but he pressed on. Every step was a gamble, as machine guns roared from both sides, and the ground shook beneath his feet. As he moved closer to the front, Thomas encountered a fellow soldier lying wounded in the mud. Without thinking, he stopped to help, pulling the soldier to safety before continuing his journey. It was an act of courage that would later be remembered, but at that moment, all Thomas could think about was delivering the message. Hours passed, and exhaustion began to take its toll. Thomas had to navigate through barbed wire, avoid craters left by explosions, and keep his head down as bullets whizzed past. But he never let go of the message, knowing that the fate of his comrades might depend on it. Finally, as night fell and the sky lit up with flares, Thomas reached the front lines. His uniform was torn, and his body ached from the strain, but he had made it. He handed the message to the commanding officer, who quickly read it and nodded in approval. The information had arrived just in time. Thanks to Thomas's bravery, the troops were able to regroup and launch a counterattack that turned the tide of the battle. The enemy was pushed back, and many lives were saved that day. When Thomas returned to his trench, he was hailed as a hero by his fellow soldiers. But in his heart, he knew that the real heroes were the countless men who fought and fell in the mud, the ones who never made it home. He didn't fight for medals or recognition. He fought for the brotherhood of soldiers who stood together in the face of unimaginable horrors. As the war dragged on, Thomas continued to serve with courage and determination, but the memory of that fateful mission stayed with him for the rest of his life. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, acts of bravery and kindness could still shine through. And when the war finally ended in 1918, Thomas returned home, not as the wide-eyed boy who had left, but as a man who had seen the true cost of war.